Today, we're diving into one of Canada's most infamous and frankly most disturbing legal cases. It's a story about some truly horrific crimes, a plea deal that sparked outrage, and a result that left an entire country asking a single question. How on earth did this happen? So, on one side, you have Paul Bernardo. He was sentenced to life in prison. But on the other, you have his wife and partner in crime, Karla Homolka, who served just 12 years and was released back in 2005. Now, these two committed monstrous acts together. So why were their punishments so wildly different? To find the answer, you really have to go back to the beginning, back to a time before the public knew the whole ugly story, when prosecutors were facing an impossible choice, and they had to make it with very limited information. I mean, this huge difference in sentences has puzzled and angered people for decades. It's become this dark case study in just how complicated the justice system can get when it's forced to deal with unimaginable evil. You see, the evidence that eventually came out would paint this absolutely horrifying picture of two equal partners. Together, they were responsible for the deaths of three teenagers: Leslie Mahaffey, Kristen French, and, unbelievably, Karla's own younger sister, Tammy Homolka. So how did Homolka end up with such a light sentence? Well, it all started with the story she told, the narrative that would pretty much define the entire prosecution and lead to her infamous deal. The horror played out over about 16 months. First, there was the death of Karla's sister Tammy, which at the time was tragically ruled an accident. Then, the abduction and murder of 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey. And finally, 15-year-old Kristen French. And for months, police had almost nothing to go on. And this is where the whole case took a massive turn. When Homolka came forward, she painted herself as a victim. She claimed Bernardo was this monster who abused her and forced her, against her will, to participate. This was the only story prosecutors, or the Crown in Canada, had to work with. Now, you have to understand, this put the prosecution in a really, really tough spot. They've got this dangerous predator on the loose, but their case against him? It's weak. No murder weapon, no confession, not a lot of forensic evidence. Homolka was the only person who could put him at the scene of the crimes and describe what happened. Her testimony was literally everything. But that battered wife story? Yeah, it wasn't the full picture. Not even close. There was a key piece of evidence missing. Evidence that would have changed everything if the prosecutors had known about it when they were making their deal. So the prosecutors moved ahead, building their entire strategy to convict a serial killer. And they had to rely completely on the word of his supposedly terrified, unwilling accomplice. All while being totally in the dark, that the truth of her involvement was so much more sinister than she was letting on. Because the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case was still hidden from them: 6 videotapes documenting the horrific assaults. The timing here is just absolutely crucial. After a massive 71-day police search of the house turned up nothing, the plea deal with Homolka was locked in. But here's the kicker. Right before the deal was struck, Bernardo's own lawyer had found the tapes and was holding onto them. This means the Crown made their deal completely blind to the most damning evidence in the case. And when those tapes finally came to light, they were devastating. They showed Homolka wasn't a battered wife. She was an active, willing participant. She was seen joking during the assaults. She played a direct role in the death of her own sister. The entire narrative she had sold to the prosecution, the very thing her plea deal was built on, it was all a lie. So the public was, you can imagine, horrified and enraged. They called it the deal with the devil. But the thing is, the deal was legally binding. It was a contract that couldn't be broken, even with this shocking new evidence. So the question becomes, why were the prosecutors so convinced they had to make it in the first place? Okay, first, it's really important to understand what a plea bargain is. It's basically a negotiation. In this situation, Homolka agreed to plead guilty to manslaughter and testify against Bernardo in exchange for a 12-year sentence. It's a tool prosecutors use to guarantee a conviction when their case is otherwise really hard to prove. So the Crown's dilemma really came down to 4 key things. 1, they were terrified Bernardo could walk free on the murder charges. 2, Homolka was their one and only witness to put him away for good. 3, they had no idea the tapes existed. And 4, they made a calculated risk to guarantee a conviction of a dangerous man, even if it meant giving his accomplice a deal that felt way too lenient. Even after all the facts came out, an official inquiry called the Galligan Report looked into how this happened. And its conclusion? That the deal, as terrible as it was the lesser of two evils. It was a choice. Make a deal with an accomplice or risk a violent predator walking free. A grim calculation for sure, but one they felt they had to make. And so, that was it. The unbreakable deal stood. Bernardo was convicted and sent to prison for life. But the price for that conviction was Karla Homolka's freedom, a freedom that came way sooner than almost anyone thought was just. 12. Just 12 years for her part in the torture and murder of 3 teenage girls. For so many people, that number just symbolizes a deep, deep crack in the justice system's ability to handle cases of such extreme evil. She served her full sentence and walked out of prison in 2005. And to this very day, The Deal with the Devil forces this really difficult conversation about how justice works, about plea bargains, and about what happens when the whole truth only comes out after it's too late to change things. Ultimately, this case shows that sometimes in the race to catch one monster, the system feels it has to make a compromise with another. And it forces us all to ask, what price are we really willing to pay to make sure a dangerous criminal is never free again? And what does that choice say about the nature of justice itself?